The European Union has unveiled a sixth round of sanctions against Russia. The bloc is looking to end its dependency on Russian oil, which is a major source of revenue for the Kremlin. It has proposed a total ban on the import of crude oil in the next 6 months. Banks and TV broadcasters are also being punished as the EU targets the Russian economy, the military and propaganda. We'll go live to Brussels and Lviv in just a moment, but first a look at rising tensions on the ground in Ukraine.
Lights out in Lviv as multiple airstrikes hit the city in Ukraine's west, cutting power in parts of the city. It's believed at least 3 Russian missiles targeted electrical substations. 2 water pump stations are without power, affecting water supply across the city. Some 85,000 households have been affected.
Також є серйозні пошкодження в комунальній інфраструктурі, повилітали вікна, фактично пошкоджено 60 гаражів, є перебої з подачею водопостачання, також перебої з електропостачанням наших певних медичних закладів, працюють всі служби.
Lviv, which is close to the Polish border, has been a relatively calm haven for those fleeing the fighting. In other parts of the country, fierce battles rage on. Ukraine's armed forces say they have repelled another 12 attacks in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Down south in Mariupol, new efforts are being made to evacuate more civilians from the besieged port city. Hope is on the rise for those still trapped in underground bunkers at the Azovstal steel plant after the United Nations and Red Cross successfully carried out one evacuation attempt.
Але мені багато разів говорили, що не вдасться врятувати жодної людини, що це неможливо. Сьогодні 156 людей в Запоріжжі. Це ще не перемога, але вже результат. Я вірю, що є шанс врятувати інших наших людей.
Still, the humanitarian efforts are not easy. Mr. Zelensky warns that Russian troops continue to bomb the steel plant despite agreements on evacuations.
And Rosie Burchett joins us live from Brussels. Rosie, the EU stepping up pressure on Russia, targeting oil and banks, but no consensus as yet on natural gas.
That's quite right. The European Union, the European Commission, the bloc executive has proposed a raft of new sanctions, including, most notably, this phased-in embargo on Russian oil imports, but nothing yet on gas. That's because the EU as a whole, and certainly several member states, remain dependent on Russia for gas supplies. So far, there is no consensus among members to move forward with sanctions targeting gas, but there was previously no consensus on sanctions targeting oil. So there is definitely some political development and movement here as this war drags on. Now, I mentioned it would be difficult to wean off of Russian gas. There is a big plan in place to try and make that happen, but it will also not be easy to cut imports of Russian oil as foreseen under this new package of sanctions. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, presented these sanctions proposals to EU parliamentarians, and she spoke specifically about that point.
We will make sure that we phase out Russian oil in an orderly fashion, so in a way that allows us and our partners to secure alternative supply routes and at the same time be very careful that we minimize the impact on the global market. And this is why we will phase out Russian supply of crude oil within 6 months and refined products by the end of the year. Thus, we maximize the pressure on Russia.
So Ursula von der Leyen, they're talking about a phased approach, 6 months for a ban on crude oil and then before the end of the year for refined oil products. That means this is not an overnight ban, as Ukraine was calling for, or even some members of the European Union, including Poland, was calling for. This is really, we think, to try and allow for the necessary consensus among these 27 member states, some of them, of course, more dependent on Russia for their energy supplies than others.
Rosie, of course, Russia so far unfazed by this. You're hearing one official saying Europe will still get Russian oil just through third-party countries. What could they mean by this?
Well, it's not entirely clear yet, and certainly there hasn't been any EU reaction to that statement. EU ambassadors are already busy looking at this package of sanctions. They will also be trying to work out how this can be implemented effectively, how they can close any loopholes. We have, of course, in the past seen attempts to circumvent sanctions. You'll remember Gazprom, that Russian energy giant, cut deliveries of gas to Bulgaria and Poland, two EU members, after it demanded that payments be received in rubles, the Russian currency. I think there's also a suggestion here that this will simply be hard to implement and hard to move forward politically, and that is certainly the case insofar as we've already heard from Hungary, one EU member, that it does not see within these proposals the necessary measures to secure its own energy supply. And if all 27 member states do not agree, there can be no moving forward with these sanctions. Unanimous backing is necessary, and that certainly would be a very bad look if they've had this big announcement and then the political dialogue back behind closed doors means that it takes a long time to move forward. So that political bargaining now among EU countries certainly underway, and already some news from Hungary that there might be issues there.
And thanks so much for all that, Rosie Burchett, speak to us from Brussels.